Um, I think the strong one was when my brother left for college and a Green Day song was playing and in his room, and the room was surrounded by boxes, and I just sat in the middle of his room, which he always hated, but I started crying, and but it was sweet. It was really sweet because he came up and, we chatted. It was really nice, actually. But I realized, he was always my big brother, so it was just funny because I realized, like, how much I was going to miss him, and I felt like an only child for once, which was, kind of a strange experience. But yeah, that was probably my strongest one, actually. Yeah. Yeah, or just playing as kids. Yeah.
Cool. What do you most admire about your mother?
Well, a lot. I think probably her quiet strength, because she grew up in circumstances where she probably should have turned out to be a complete, psycho, but she didn't. And I think it was because I told her this once, that her parents were so different than she is. And I think it was because they treated her like an outsider and so badly that she actually was an outsider, which was a good thing, because then she was able to separate herself and really develop her own personality and the kind of parent she wanted to be. And she's the antithesis of what they both were. So I think I admire that the most, because against all odds, she's an incredible, sweet, nice, kind person. And I guess it just blows me away of how did you do it, So I guess it was always inside of her, but still it's, I like seeing that, witnessing that. Yeah. Against all odds, somehow it turns out great. So, yeah.
Cool. What do you most admire about your father?
Well, let's see. I most admire his fearlessness, actually. I have that horrible gene where I just don't get embarrassed ever, and that's, definitely from him. But he is one of those rare people who genuinely does not care what anyone thinks of him. But I think it's a good quality, actually, because it kind of helped my confidence a bit, growing up, and just this is what I like, and this is what I want to do, and that's what I'm going to do. And so I've seen him do it, so it's just very easy to be who I was as a kid because of that, I think. Yeah. Cool. I really thought about that.
How are you like your parents, and how are you different?
Oh, gosh. Okay. I am similar to them in the sense that, let's see. I mean, I'd have to separate it. I think, like, my mother, I get any kindness, patience, I definitely get from her. She's great with kids. I love being around kids, too. My dad's actually really great with kids, too. And she's shy. She has a shy streak. And I definitely, obviously, don't have that. But she's... that's something that I don't have from her. And I think also, she can be a little self-conscious and just more well-mannered, I think, than I am. But she really wants people to feel comfortable around her and is so observant of other people. And I don't think I'm like that. And I think it's a good quality in her, but I don't think I have it. And with my dad, I think... anything outgoing is from my dad, absolutely. And I think, my love of nature, I think that was definitely, well, actually it's from my mom and my dad. But my dad, and I think how we're different in a lot of ways. I think when we see injustice in the world, I think this is the clearest definition of how we're different. He will stand his ground and fight. And whether that be, you know, a past work situation or, you know, and he was in the right in those cases. I was in a similar work situation, and I left. I got out of it. It was kind of a immoral work place, and I just had no business being there. I couldn't be there and be around it. So I was very different because I think I pick and choose my battles, and I think he rises to the occasion, and I think we're different in that way because I don't like to rise to the occasion unless I have to. So yeah, I think that's how we're the most different. Yeah.
Cool.
No, which is funny because I think most people do, and my 30s, I'm 31, and my 30s are already so much better than my 20s. So much better. And I had a lot of fun in my 20s, but I feel like a completely different person. I feel like I'm proud of the life choices that I've already made just in the short amount of time being in my 30s. And, you know, we all make mistakes in our 20s, you know, of course, college. But I like it because you still feel really young, but yet you have a better sense of yourself. And it's just, and people tend to know, not everybody, but people tend to know by that point what they're interested in and what they want to do. And that was something that I was trying to figure out all through my 20s because I was determined to do it no matter how long it took. And I did find that what I love to do. And I think it just makes life a little more interesting for me now that I actually know. I don't feel lost. I feel more directed. So yeah, I like my 30s better. Yeah, definitely.
How do you handle uncertainty?
I thrive off change. So uncertainty kind of comes with that sometimes, but sometimes it just depends upon the situation. Like uncertainty, that's life in general. Like you never, even if you make a choice and you know you decide to take a job and you're excited about the job, it can be great, of course, but you know it can be something different than what you expected, and that could be in a good way too. But you never know what life's going to hand out, so you just kind of have to. Something I've tried to be doing a little more in my 30s is to go with the flow, and I think I'm trying to get better at it. I'm not very good at it yet, but that's definitely on the life list. So yeah, that's how I handle it, I guess. I don't know. I think that sometimes what people might not see the big picture of their lives. I certainly didn't. It took a while to connect the dots of the big events in my life and that they were all completely related. And there was a reason for that, which I didn't know until my 30s. Another reason I love my 30s. Some of the big events in my life, and obviously disclaimer, you know, adults only for this one, but I had a very negative experience when I was 5, which is so common, unfortunately, after the research that I've done, and that's why I actually wanted to be on the site and talk about it, because I don't think people are talking about it, and it's not right, I think, anymore. So with what I'm talking about is child sexual abuse, and it's very difficult to talk about when you've been through it, you've witnessed it, or you've tried to protect a child, which I've been in both situations now, and I did. I was able to protect the child for the most part, but my first experience with that, I guess, was when I was 5, and that was with my grandfather. So that was just incredibly difficult. And I think what many people don't realize is that, you know, children do not lie. They don't make up these things. If they say something's happening like this, it's happening, because children's minds they're not warped like that. They can't even imagine something so strange because it is unnatural. And so so I told my parents that day because I always had a big mouth, and but thank God for that, because that saved me. And I told my parents at dinner, and what was unusual is that 80% of the time the family will not believe the child. And so I was in that 20th percentile. I was very lucky, and they protected me, and they were incredible. And it was the best case scenario for that horrible experience. It was I was lucky, ironically, in that way. So I'll always be so deeply grateful for what they did. And he died I think a year later or something, I don't know. And but then it turned out my mom called her sister, my aunt, that day, and then my sister finally revealed that he had been doing that to her throughout, up until she went to elementary school, all through her childhood. So, and that was her father, which is, really, I can't even imagine. I mean, at least I had one generation away, but it's all horrible. Either, any way you put it, it's really horrible. And what's most horrible is that she passed away, but she was so wonderful, and was able to get married and have a really happy marriage, and just such a great guy. And he passed away as well. But I think what's important for people to know is that when that does happen to you, you can find very healthy relationships, and you can heal from it, and it's not going to define the rest of your life. And I think that, especially for the kids that haven't spoken up, or many kids don't feel like they can, and in many situations they can't, especially when it's just like a parent. Who do you go to if it's your parent? I can't even imagine. And this is why I think that my aunt never told anyone, and she did think it was just her, and who would understand that sickness, I guess. I don't know. And anyhow, so that was 5, but it really I felt very bonded to my aunt when I found that out as a teenager. My mom told me that later on. And it was sad because she had passed away already, and I couldn't talk to her about it. And I think that's something that's weighs on me a little bit, because she would get it. She understands how that would feel exactly, actually. And yeah. But anyway, what I didn't realize was that the life events that followed are actually very atypical of people who are in those situations. So what I ended up learning was rape is quite common. Unwanted pregnancies are quite common. Just these kinds of situations where you feel like, oh, maybe I shouldn't have put myself in that situation, and you kind of blame yourself, and then you don't even realize, is this a rape or isn't it? Because you doubt your own instincts, because your instincts are screwed up almost. Like they're not, but you feel like they are, because you couldn't figure out what in the world you grew up with, or what is your version of normal, and it really messes with your version of normal. And that's what's so hard, because even picking friends and picking people to date, it's so much more difficult, because I've heard from many people, oh, you have trust issues or things like that, which is quite cruel to say to someone who has these experiences. Of course, I didn't tell any of them that I did, because, it's incredibly personal, and I didn't want it to define me, and it hasn't. But, I think that people have to understand that how common it is, and how many people are experiencing this, and why, perhaps rape is so common and things like that, because sadly, many who are abused and don't speak up and aren't able to get through it, or talk to someone like a therapist or family member or anything, it's very common to have repeat offenders. And what I've read is that it's their way of kind of trying to control a situation where it's a power thing, I think. And in so much has come out, and this is controversial, but I don't really care. So much has come out about the Catholic Church and the priests and all these things, and it was going on in Ireland and coming out in other nations as well for a long time. And I think, even back to the Sinead O'Connor days, on SNL when she, rips the picture of the Pope, people in America were so offended because, okay, she's against the Pope. That's all they were thinking. And what they didn't report on, for the most part, which was shocking, was that she was a victim of abuse. And she was trying to create awareness in America that, something has to be done. It wasn't against the Pope himself. It was that children need to be protected, and this is happening here too. And what she did was, the way she did it kind of seems so offensive, because if you don't know the backstory to it, it really seems like a extreme way to do it. But at the same time, it's sad because it didn't really promote awareness of it as she had wanted. And just being a survivor of abuse, and I don't like ever hearing the word victim from anybody. I think it's better to say survivor in these cases. But, being a survivor of abuse, it is impossibly difficult to talk about. And it took me years to be able to, tell my extended family and other people, but I've still kept pretty quiet about it. And because it's nobody's business. But I think another thing I really wanted to talk about was, I think a lot of these children feel shame, and I don't think that that's right. And I certainly felt shame. My mother really wanted me to, keep quiet about it, don't say anything, and she was protecting me, and that made sense. But now as an adult, things are different, because this is what the problem is. Nobody wants to talk about it. It's so uncomfortable, and it is so vilely, it's disgusting and sordid that it's, when can you bring up the topic? And Oprah, she talked about her experiences as a victim of abuse and rape and just horrific experiences. But she did an interview that might help a lot of people if they see it, where she interviewed 4 child molesters. And I came across it this year online, and I couldn't listen to it. But I did read the, papers on it, and just, there were prints out of the dialogue. And for some reason, reading it in the written word was easier than hearing these people speak, because I don't know how she didn't just leap across the room and smack him in the face, or worse. And so I obviously, I don't really watch TV much, but I did hear about that, and I really respect it, and anyone who can talk about this. So and I was raped, and that happened more than once, and one was very violent, and that was in college, and the other one was also in college, but in my hometown, but the person wasn't from my hometown. And that one, it was a drug rape, whatever, and I only remembered one flash from it, but I didn't even know what had happened. It was so messed up. I actually didn't even know what had happened to me, because I had no memory of it. So, in these situations, it's very difficult, because if it's not so obviously violent, and if it's with someone who, I think a lot of people think, oh, rapes happen with, someone was attacked on the street at night, and, which is horrific. But in most cases, it's someone and that is a fact. More often than not, that's almost always the case. It's an acquaintance or, someone. And I did stand up to that person in college, I think my last year of college, which was incredibly difficult because he kept trying to talk to me, and I just said, I will tell everyone here what you did if you don't back away. And it made everyone around me uncomfortable, which was too bad because my friends didn't know. But I didn't care anymore. I had nothing to lose, I felt. And so with this, talking about my grandfather, I think, I really suffered from post-traumatic stress from these experiences, which, I was told I was by a therapist, but they're so traumatic and they stay with you. And it's sad because that kind of part of your life should be a pleasant experience and happens naturally and, when you're ready and over time. And I've never had that ever, actually. So I'm still working on things. But there's a great book that I would recommend to a lot of people that's called The Sexual Healing Journey, and I think it's by Wendy Maltz. And that changed my life completely. Without that, I don't know where I would be right now. And I think that it really puts things in perspective of, that you're not a mess and these things are not your fault. It's just, this is what ends up happening because no one talks about it. And there is something called Aaron's Law that's being passed in some states. I think it's passed in about 7 or 8 now. I don't know. And this girl, Erin, she was abused, and she has been kind of lobbying, I don't really know exactly the term for it in her case, but for education of young children to speak up if something like that happens. And that's a very, very tricky thing, I think, because in my opinion, it is up to the parents to kind of decide how to do it. But in many cases, they're not talking. They're not teaching the kids. They're not saying, what you expect. And it's so heart-wrenching that you even have to tell an innocent that these things are out in the world, which I hate. So, but that's something to really think about and to really feel proud that you made it through and that you never did anything, that, it wasn't your fault. And I heard once when I told someone what had happened to me, they said, "Oh, I would have run away screaming." And I just wanted to crack them across the face because I really did. Because that is exactly what you do not do. It's never happens like that. Because it's often a trusted, either a family member, a babysitter, a close family friend, something like that. And I learned a lot after doing a lot of research. I found out that they prep children. I was being prepped and didn't know it. It's so hard to talk about, but it's just so gross. They and I learned this from the Oprah thing, but they will kind of see how far they can go with a kid, and there are certain warning signs, and I definitely encourage people to listen to that interview because it is very powerful, but it's kind of hard to talk about. But that's something that I think parents need to be aware of what to look for, and and what I've read also is that many people who are gay, not all, absolutely not all, but in many cases, there has been sexual abuse that was of the same sex, either, teenage years or in childhood, and which is so unfair for the just general reason that it's disgusting. It's not fair to even have that experience. But I think what people don't understand is that it can confuse the child or the teenager or whatever, because that in those cases, they don't, your body's going to respond naturally. And so that may, put in the psyche that, okay, I guess that's how I'm going to live my life. And you know what? More power to you. There's nothing wrong with it. But I feel like for those individuals, whatever you feel comfortable with is what you should do.